Hi, I'm Zanzi. You are listening to Farmers Inside Track, proudly brought to you by Food Forum Zanzi. I am your host, Patricia Tembo, and welcome to today's episode. Our farmer mentor for today is Craig Carter, who runs a weaner calf production system in KwaZulu-Natal and has over 25 years of experience. So grab your notebook as we hear from his years of experience. Craig Carter, welcome to Farmers Inside Track. I'm so excited that you are our farmer mentor for today.
Thank you very much, Patricia. It's great to join you. And thanks for the opportunity to share my journey with you.
I know you are very experienced. As a livestock technical advisor at RMIS, our farmers may be familiar with you. But maybe for our audience who haven't heard of Craig Carter and the work that you're doing in the agricultural sector as well, could you give us an overview before we get into your story as a farmer?
Yes, certainly. I've been farming for about 25 years. I've pretty much always been involved with organized agriculture, and I've had a very good opportunity with a cooperative in the USA called Genex, who had a massive development campaign in South Africa over the last 5 years, and their project came to an end July last year. And I've known quite a few people in the industry and worked with RMIS previously on some farm assessments, etc. Inevitably ended up doing some work for the RMIS up till date in the development space as far as emerging agriculture is concerned. It's been a great journey. That's in short.
That is amazing. And of course, you have years of experience. I think you said 25 years. Let's get into that because that is over 2 decades. But how did this journey start?
I finished matric in 1988 in a countryside school, Dundee High School. Shortly after that, I met Chantal, whom I married. She's from farming stock. So I was very fortunate to marry into farming stock. I've always wanted to be a farmer and specifically livestock. And so I was just very, very fortunate to marry into a farming family.
That is amazing. And when you married into the family, you picked up the farming right away, the livestock farming, or was it something that your wife was running herself before you joined?
No, so it was never intended that I start farming. Way back when we got married, I studied electrical engineering and I became a qualified electrician, and we were actually going to move away from the actual farming setup. And her father sadly passed away during that time, shortly after we got married. And obviously Chantal said, well, listen, we've got to carry on the farming next door to her brother. He's a very, very experienced cattleman. And that's where my farming journey started. As I said earlier, I've always wanted to be a farmer, but I never thought that farming would actually fall into my lap, if I can call it that. It certainly has been a great journey. I've been very, very grateful to be able to farm, but it was quite a story starting out farming, as any young farmer will know when they start out farming. It's not just getting onto the farm and start farming. It's none of that.
Why is it that you had thought farming was out of your reach? I'm quite curious, actually.
Well, I grew up in a very small little town called Danhauser. It's probably about 80 kilometers from where we are situated on the farm here, and was predominantly a mining town with some very little industry surrounding. And generally, when people in that sector, when children grow up, they tend to get back into the sector. It's almost like a generational thing. I thought that because my father worked in the mining industry, I would end up in the mining industry. He was an electrician. I became an electrician. And I thought that definitely one day I'd like to pursue a career in engineering. But growing up in the 80s, there was a lot of veldt and there were a lot of farms around us. And I've always been attracted to just being out in the open. And I've probably stay away from home till quite late over weekends. And they knew where I was. I'd be out in the surrounding fields there with cattle, with my friends. And it was just one of those things. I just didn't think that farming would actually become so part of my life. I'm very grateful for that.
It's amazing. And fate had it that you met your wife and, you were able to fulfill that dream that you had to go into farming. I think that's quite beautiful. Maybe looking at the livestock business that you are running now, if you could talk us through it. You mentioned earlier, is In our previous conversation, when I'd met you, you'd mentioned you farm with beef cattle, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, maybe if you could just walk us through.
So when Chantal and I started farming, obviously there was a kind of a divide in the land that her father had farmed actively. Portions of the land was allocated to her brother and portions of the land was allocated to Chantal. So at that stage, I didn't know anything at all as far as farming was concerned. Her father was a beef farmer, predominantly a Simbra weaner calf producer for feedlots. And for the land that was allocated, and this might just be a kind of a technical point where some young farmer might just learn something from this, where the type of breed of animal that Chantal got from her father wasn't really suitable for the land that she was given. It was quite a large framed animal. These animals weren't really suited for the mountainous terrain because her brother got quite a large portion of the land that's more flat, which is conducive for a larger framed animal. And Chantal got more of the mountainous terrain. So I only realized this a few years later, where I saw that the larger framed animals didn't really do too well in terms of conception, recarving and putting them back to the bull in the mountainous terrains. So it was a very big learning curve for us. But yes, we're into a weaner calf production system now. And I've opted for a red felt beef type of animal, leaning towards Bonsmara. I love the Bonsmara animals. And certainly we've introduced some Brangus as well, just because I love that type of animal. But yes, it's been a learning curve, and I tend to enjoy the conditions for my farm have allowed for a medium frame type of animal. And the Bonsmaras and the Branguses have done very well for us.
Lovely. I love that you're already dropping like nuggets of wisdom there. If you're from your experience, I'm learning, and I think our farmers are learning of the importance of actually having the breed suited to the environment and the climate of the region. Looking at the production system itself, curious if you are breeding. It's weaner calf production. So are you breeding on the farm as well?
Well, if I say we're in a breeding enterprise as far as weaner calf production is concerned, we only breed weaners for obviously to go off to either backgrounding systems or feedlot systems. But we aren't breeding bulls per se. The heifer calves, as opposed to the bull calves, we go through a very, very careful selection process. And I've got a very good friend that actually helps me with the selection process to get the right heifer calves back into our production system to follow the old cows that obviously get taken out of the system when they reach the date of maturity on the farm.
Looking at the scale, how would you describe it, the scale to which the production system operates on currently?
Patricia, we certainly aren't mega farmers or massive farmers in terms of weaner calf production or beef cattle production, but our farm has been very, very good to us and it's been very rewarding. What I've had to do is look at areas where we can vertically grow the farm. So farmers don't always necessarily have the resources just to go and buy out extra portions of land to increase their farming entities. So vertical growth has been very, very important for us. And a big part of that has been to try and control bush encroachment and to establish pastures and to redesign your camps so that you can get better and optimal usage out of the land that you actually have available to you. And that's very important for our young farmers. And I make that point very clearly to our young new farmers that come into systems where I say, you've got to always try and use your land optimally. To clear a hectare of bush is cheaper than buying an extra hectare of land. We've had to certainly look at that. We've got some very, very big farmers in the area. They've taken up most of the beef production entities in this space. It's been kind of difficult to buy extra land close to your production enterprise, but certainly we've added value by vertical growth as far as our farms are concerned.
It does sound like you pay very close attention to land utilization, of course, with grazing cattle. So maybe if you could go into more key factors that have enabled you to grow the business and how you, I suppose, found the balance with the terrain as well that you're working with, the breed that you're working with, environmental conditions as well. Some of the factors that have, kept you going to the success that you have come to at this point.
Obviously, there's been a huge amount of hard work and work ethic that goes into it. And without a passion for those components within your production systems, it's going to be a long and very, very hard journey. The other factor that you have to be very, very mindful of is keeping a very, very close eye on your finances. Farmers always say, there's no ways we're making money this year. For next year, it might be better. But that's just one of those key factors where you've got to keep a very, very close eye on finances. And then obviously keeping your family also not involved from a work perspective, but having everybody on the same page as far as in which direction is our enterprise moving. Who can add value? It's like my son, he's in Canada at the moment and he's on a very big value chain farm there. And I'd love for him to come back and add value on the farm just in terms of what we've done, but he's got to bring new knowledge back from a different part of the world and potentially implement some of those factors back into this farm that could make it take another step in the right direction. So yes, certainly a lot of hard work, a lot of passion, a lot of very turning over your pennies, and you've got to love what you do. That's one of the key factors too.
And of course, to keep a business running, one has to have, I suppose, some form of take agreement or a market that's to where you're taking your product, or in this case, livestock. Maybe speak to us about how you developed that sort of, I suppose, model for the business. And how that came to be, and maybe advice you have for farmers who are maybe also looking at production systems where they're working with weaner calves as well.
Generally, we'd wean our calves at weights of anything between 180 and 220 kilograms. We'd send them off to market, and market would generally be an auctioneer here in Dundee, where a whole lot of feedlotters or speculators or backgrounding farmers would attend the auction and buy those calves. Some of the calves that I've kept just in a backgrounding system means that I've just taken a calf of approximately 200 to 220 kgs and put them into a separate production system where I would grow them out to approximately 260 or 280 kilograms, which is then very ideal for a feedlotter to buy in immediately to go into the feedlotting system. I haven't done that for a few years because weaner calves have been financially rewarding in terms of rands per kgs. It's a completely different scenario now because of our foot and mouth situation. But if we just look at our conventional weaner and backgrounding systems and feedlotting systems, that's pretty much how I've gauged on what markets are going to be more conducive for our finances for a specific period. So it's a constant, you got to keep your eye on what the market is doing. A very good friend of mine, Derek Ray from Up George Monsmaras, always says you've just always got to try and stay outside the curvature system. So when everybody's selling weaners, you shouldn't be selling weaners because then it becomes a supply and demand issue. And Derek certainly has been a very big mentor for myself in that regard. There's no farmer, whether he's been farming for 2 years or 50 years, he's always going to be telling you that he's still learning. So I'm always open to advice, trying to learn from clever people.
That's important, isn't it, for a farmer to stay open to learning, even though they may have, years and years of experience.
Exactly. I think a big part of agriculture at this stage, and it doesn't matter in which sector you are, whether you're in beef, chickens, you've got to keep your eye on technology and how technology can improve your enterprise.
One of the major challenges we know farmers, especially livestock farmers, have is with input costs and it being feed. How have you managed to balance this, or how do you go about keeping cash flow going, maintaining quality feed and the feeding programs that you have on the farm as well? Maybe talk us through that if you can.
That certainly is one of the bigger challenges in any farming setup, is trying to keep cash flow and expenses, inputs relative to your production system. It does become very, very tricky when you start running into challenges. For instance, a drought. What do you do when you're suddenly caught out with a drought? Or major floods like some of our farmers have been devastated by over the last season. Potentially even this season in the last couple of weeks. Farmers generally rely very heavily in certain cases on production finance and bridging finance. farmers have become very clever as far as managing that system is concerned, because it certainly has become challenging in terms of you can't just go out to a bank and go and borrow money. It's a lot more complicated nowadays. So farmers have had to adapt their outlook as far as their future planning goes. And I see a lot of farmers have opted to looking at a more short-term planning scenario, which helps with your cash flow, and then start, planning that into a more long-term objective. It changes all the time. If I've got my production loans and my overdrafts and all the rest in place for the next year, it could change at the drop of a hat. And it's just a matter of, at that stage, you have to try and adapt to the situation that poses itself. There's no real short answer to that question. Sorry.
And maybe looking at challenges, of course, with farming, one doesn't go into it with naivety because, of course, you are working with nature and that's not a factor that we can always control. So maybe if you could speak on some of the challenges that you have experienced in your 25 plus years and how you have navigated those for farming listening, especially for livestock or a beef producer who may be listening as well.
Certainly the biggest challenges that I faced on this farm have been droughts. And I remember a good few years ago, we've had very, very good seasons. We've been very, very blessed by good rains in the last few seasons. But droughts certainly have, that taught me so much in terms of how to adapt, how to just ride out that wave and see what plans can be made. How do you adapt if that drought persists over into the following season? How many animals do I keep as far as my production system goes? Can my farm sustain? So there's so many factors that I certainly had to look at. For instance, I had to change my camping system. I had to change my watering system. I had to borrow extra money for boreholes. And I'm just very thankful that way back in the day, I did all of that, because you also often in the New Year's, you have a very dry spell in February. And if I hadn't done all those interventions way back when it was very dry, I probably would have been in trouble, if I hadn't put in extra boreholes and extra piping, extra fencing to split camps. So you just had to adapt. And it was hard. It was tough, financially debilitating, but we got through it. That's where the heart of the farmer should be, is just to try and persevere in very, very tough conditions where you just got to keep on making plans, because you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for the love of the land and the love of the animals, etc., etc. It's a passion,
From what you have shared so far, one can tell that you already have started a legacy, and there are likely farmers who are already looking up to you and, the work that you've done so far. Maybe to close off, how do you see yourself leaving the farm, or what is the legacy that you'd like to leave behind with beef production? What is your big end goal production system?
I go back to where I said I always wanted to farm from when I was a little boy. And I guess farming came my way because the old saying, if you want something, speak it into life. But as far as the legacy is concerned, we are stewards. We should be good stewards of the land. And if we're good stewards of the land, many things will come our way without us realizing it. And when you get those things, and I'm talking into a spiritual realm here, because I certainly couldn't have done it without God. To get back to legacy, if I'm a good steward of the land, that is the legacy that I want to leave for people to see that I was a good steward of this land, and to leave something positive and good for young farmers. That I'd like to leave is, if there's one young farmer that can learn from one intervention that I made in my life, and that's a success, that's a legacy. The farms that we're on, for my kids just to get here and say, wow, thanks, thank you, Lord. Thanks to my parents. That's the legacy. And it's not so much of the material things that we leave behind. It's those heartfelt things where you can just say thank you and just leave a wow factor. I don't know if that makes sense.
It definitely does. I love that. Recently at an engagement, the DG Ramasori the DG of the Department of Agriculture, he was just commenting on how he's never met an atheist farmer. And it's just amazing to hear you speaking about it. A lot of it is also driven by your faith, which is beautiful. And I think a lot of farmers listening can relate to that.
Indeed. I just have to mention that I'm so grateful for the opportunity at RMIS and the development space that we're in. I just see young farmers with passion. And that's the first and foremost thing, that when you get onto that farm, you've got to have passion. A good friend of mine always says, if you go into any business and you start chasing money, it'll run from you. So walk into that business with faith, have passion, and be grateful in the good and the bad times.
I think you've left it on a really great note. In the conversation, I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to add to the conversation and to the advice that you've shared, if there is anything else you'd like to.
Thank you very much. I have many farmers, new farmers, experienced farmers from all sectors that I've got to know very well and personally. And if there are any other new farmers that would like advice and just hear a little bit more about some of the farmers that we've mentored, want to connect to those farmers and to ourselves at RMIS in our development space, feel free to reach out. We're here to make agriculture an even greater space. We've got to make use of the land and we've got to make it productive.
Thank you so much to Craig Carter. And of course, you can read more about this episode by visiting www.foodforumzansi.co.za. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. From myself, Patricia Tembo, our technical producer, Megan van der Vent, and the rest of #Team Food Forum Zanzi, thank you for listening and keep growing with us.